eventual conflict. The next argument is the red line's accident thing. It's zero. It's an extension without a war. They've conclusively conceded the 2NT extension 1C limb. NT3's air gap, meaning it's structurally incapable of being prone to cyber warfare or escalation, coupled with 2NT conceded argument that China would never escalate against space or nuclear systems because of diplomacy, and they have no reason to. The U.S. food stockpiles thing was done above. Thucydides trapped true is wrong. They've dropped the 2NT Martin evidence head-on answer to all their stuff since China already completed the power transition, which disproves logically Thucydides trapped the argument about our card setting a foreign minister there. It cites internal Chinese leadership saying that they would never want to escalate and want to maintain conflicts low level, which means there's no impact to this. The card that they read is horrible. They've conceded no SES war. The U.S. will never go nuclear to defend the Vietnam or Vietnam and the Philippines is obviously, but China will de-escalate, and the U.S. effectively restrains them. The card just cites flashpoints, which all over defense above answers because it says those flashpoints are wrong. It's also post-dated by Oliver 24 defense. The Chinese military is fucked. The U.S. nukes China scenario is zero. They've conceded it would be suicide for millions of Americans. The end of an American regime because every U.S. military player knows China could certainly retaliate. The risk of eternal impact is tiny because at worst we lose a conventional war with China down the road and look a little silly. Can't possibly cause extinction. Look, conceded Biden does the plan in like 3 months. None of the rest of this shit matters. They've dropped that Trump first strikes everyone, causing extinction, which means there's no time for a ballot. There's a certain long-run try or die ballot because nuclear war doesn't cause extinction. If you think that a China conflict that causes a U.S. nuke is not coming in the next 3 months, you have to vote negative.
227 or 252. Excuse me. The order is premise 1. Oh yeah, sorry.
Well.
We're good for a virtual.
Okay. Premise 1, premise 2, elections. The entire 2 hours centered around this argument that Biden will do an NFU in the next few months. Their evidence on this is terrible. The line that Graham has inserted says he is, quote, thinking about hinting at adopting an NFU policy. This is not conclusive. This does not say when it would happen. It doesn't say it would happen in the second term, etc. This piece of evidence that they're staking the debate on does not substantiate that Biden would do an NFU policy in the status quo. It isn't in the tag, and we said that diplomacy fails in the 1AR, which should be sufficient to prove that Biden is not imminently going to adopt an NFU policy. The link also disproves that Biden's going to adopt an NFU policy because it proves it would destroy his election chances if the premise of their link argument that it's so unpopular is true. That means that it doesn't take out any of the affirmative case. The AFF advantage is set up to be a faster time frame than the disadvantage. The earliest possible time frame for a Trump victory is November 24. I am confident we are winning that a U.S.-China conventional conflict will happen and escalate faster than that. Emory's generic impact defense won't get it done. Framing issues are Beckley and Brand's evidence from this year say that China is stockpiling food and munitions to reduce their vulnerability to sanctions as conflict nears. That's only something countries do when conflict is truly imminent. Their first argument is that it would be doom their economy. That's why they're stockpiling resources now. Our Mazar or Beckley and Brand's evidence assumes this warrant. They say that we're misreading incentives and that it would hurt their domestic legitimacy. Later on down the flow, they say that China would crack down on the domestic population, which proves that they don't care about things like domestic legitimacy. And our authors are citing things like Chinese officials and reading the incentive that what else would China do things like stockpile food, etc. The Emory's just reading blocks about generic impact defense, but that all of our evidence assumes. They say the U.S. would never do it because China has a secure second strike. We have a couple of scenarios in which the U.S. would first use. First is a counterforce damage limitation strike against China. The U.S. would, in a conventional conflict, try to counterforce China if they think that China is about to imminently attack us. Secondly, our doctrine, or NPR, says that we leave the use on the table. The third is domestic pressure. Our Sweeney evidence says that if China takes out a U.S. carrier, then we would lose more people in an hour than in the entire Iraq war. And there would be massive domestic pressure on the United States to retaliate against China. If the affirmative advantage is true, it's much faster time frame if a conventional conflict happens, and certainly turns the disadvantage much longer than their abstract warming argument. They say China crackdowns, that's not relevant because they don't care about their domestic population. They've also conceded that China will not use first in a conflict, which proves that U.S. first strike is the only way it can possibly go nuclear. Even if Trump strikes Russia or North Korea, they don't have a piece of evidence that those cause extinction because our clear evidence is the only piece of evidence that says that a U.S.-China war would actually cause extinction. They say NC3, that China would never escalate because of diplomacy. They dropped that diplomacy fails and that China, and I'm not going to go for the China getting in our NC3 stuff. The Thucydides trap is not completed. China is still rising and the U.S. is still at declining power, which is proven by our third piece of evidence in the 1AC. They say internal leaders keep it low level. China has an incentive to escalate because they have territorial disputes. And our second piece of evidence in the 1AC, our Mazar evidence, says that they're being increasingly less risk averse as it comes to territorial conflicts because they think that they can beat the U.S. in a conventional conflict. They say that the U.S. won't go nuclear and that flashpoints are wrong. This is untrue. China is becoming increasingly aggressive as per our Mazar evidence. They say it would be suicide for the U.S. Not true. If we think we can execute a damage limitation strike. Also, if Sleepy Joe is in office, then he would be confident that it wouldn't actually cause extinction because he would think that we could damage limit them and domestic pressure outweighs. They say that Biden does the plan. Untrue. Answered above. They say Trump first strikes everyone. That will be answered on the disadvantage, and it begs the question of the link. View both affirmative and negative scenarios probabilistically. If we win link defense and that our affirmative is huge and fast, then that certainly outweighs the disadvantage. Now, the dissent. One, no, you flipped off. Swing voters aren't real. This dissent story relies on a mythical narrative of 35,000 retirees in Michigan who are ambivalent about Gaza, abortion, and the border, but so attuned to American declaratory policy that an obscure change to our doctrine is enough to flip the election. Partisan polarization means people's voting decisions are locked in. They won't change their minds about Biden and Trump. That's Mills people. They're supposedly undecided are statistically the least likely to swing the election. The small margin of people who are open to change their opinions aren't going to vote at all, will vote third party or already know who they're voting for and lying. That's true. Anyone who would choose Trump over Biden is because of a no first use policy lives under a rock. They've dropped the embedded black swans claim. If voters are fickle enough to care about the plan, then they're also fickle enough to swing on inevitable future events. Trump is the king of black swans. He's so volatile that he'll inevitably do something to offend them. Think of 2016. Every week there was another breaking news about a sex scandal. Off the cuff comment. That's Tabernice and our Cone evidence. Haley voters are not swing voters. This is contrived and answered by the 1AR. The phrase swing voters doesn't even show up anywhere in their evidence. And they've dropped that they'll inevitably vote for whoever they chose in 2016. The definition of a swing voter is someone who voted for either Trump and Biden in 2020 and will vote for the opposite person in 2024. Our evidence says that those people don't exist. Even if some people are supporting Haley right now, they will just continue to vote for whoever the post-Haley nomination. They'll just continue to vote for whoever Trump or Biden that they voted for in 2016, which denies the premise of their link. The black swan stuff. Emory has set the link threshold far, far too low. Again, they said the threshold is just a few thousand people in key battleground states is enough to swing the election. The fact that a black swan or any type of foreign policy conflict can happen between now and November 2024, or in November 2024, proves that the election could swing in either direction for either Biden or Trump. This denies the premise of the link. Other framing issue, even if the soft on China link is true, the plan isn't necessarily perceived as soft on China, and a slew of other factors could cause either Biden or Trump to be perceived as soft on China between now and the end of the election. The drop that Biden doesn't solve climate change, the piece of evidence that we read in the 2AC that Graham finished in the 1AR says that Biden isn't sufficient to, it's all talk and bluster, and that he's greenlighting projects that hurt the environment, like drilling projects, etc. The Trump first strikes evidence, framing issue, or clear evidence, is the only piece of evidence that says that nuclear war causes extinction and is specific to the U.S. and China. Their evidence that says that nuclear war doesn't cause extinction and that only warming does is equally qualified as our clear evidence, and doesn't assume that the massive nuclear arsenals that the U.S. and China has, if the U.S. attempts a damage limitation strike, that would literally destroy the planet.
Good debate.
Good debate.